In today's episode, I interview one of India's leading conservation filmmakers, Rita Banerji. She is the founder of Dusty Foot Production and Dusty Foot Foundation, through which Greenhouse was established in 2014. Through the Greenhouse project, she is supporting countless upcoming wildlife filmmakers and conservationists from Northeast India. An Ashoka Fellow, Rita is the winner of multiple Green Oscars for her films on wildlife and environmental conservation. I am sure you will enjoy hearing about Rita's amazing work. As always, 30% of the revenue generated from this episode through optional paid subscriptions on Substack will be donated to conservation projects like the Dusty Foot Foundation. Welcome, Rita, to the podcast. It's a pleasure to have you on here today.
Yeah, thanks, Anish. Yeah.
So, what got you interested in environmental filmmaking?
Actually, initially, when I started my journey, it was more with photography in college. My father had given me one of those old, Agfa cameras. That time it was film cameras. This was 1990, right? And so that got me hooked on to photography because it was black and white photography. We used to go and get the film developed, and it was a hook. But I still didn't know whether it would be a career ever, because at that time we had no idea. And so Riverbank Studios used to be just behind our college. I was studying in Delhi, and I started going there just to see, that was the first exposure into videography and video films. And Riverbanks was into environment films. So that's how my journey began actually. I joined Riverbank Studios straight after college as a production assistant. And my main love was camera, and but then I ended up spending 10 years there. And from camera, it went on to editing because I loved machines. And that time, the editing machines were not computers. They were these big, machines where you played around with dials and jockey sticks and things like that. So that's how it all began. And I think it was pretty clear soon when we started traveling across India. That time, a lot of the travel was on the road because, you had to carry your equipment, which used to be a lot of stuff. You carried your own gas, food, everything. And somehow everything fell into place. I knew this is what I wanted to do. And environment films, wildlife film became like somehow it was a very clear decision that this is the path I wanted to take. Yeah, that's how the journey began.
So, what role do you think filmmaking has for conservation?
See, video and filmmaking is, I would say, a very strong tool for bringing out stories from the ground. Actually, like there's so much happening across India. If I just talk about India, right? There are two things here. You have wildlife conservation and you have rural development. And somewhere both of them merge into the same area somewhere. You're somewhere protecting the environment, somewhere creating sustainable livelihoods, right? There is a lot happening on the ground, and those stories do not come out. Okay, and if those stories do not come out, how is the narrative across India going to change? That when you're talking about sustainable futures, these are the areas where we need to focus on, you know? So I think film plays a very important role in bringing out these stories from the ground. And if we're talking about a future where the youth are the future, then to enable that future, they need to see these stories. And in our journey, even while I was in Riverbanks, we were very fortunate to be part of films which actually ended up making a difference. So we made shows of silence, the whale sharks in India, the killing of whale sharks in India. The film kind of revealed the fact that whale sharks were killed along the Indian coast, and mostly for their liver and for their fat. Post the film, it led to the fish being whale shark being put in the Wildlife Protection Act. That was the first fish in India to be put into the Wildlife Protection Act. And then the other groups, NGOs, and everybody took it up at the policy level. So yeah, so the film ended up becoming very crucial to that protection of the whale shark, which even till date it's one of the landmark projects. And many films across India, Shekhar Dattari's film on mines was used as one of the films which helped with the mining in Kudremukh. The Amur Falcon, the protection of the Amur Falcon was based on a video clip. That triggered the whole campaign to save the Amur Falcons. So I think video and films have a very strong role to play when we're talking about environment conservation. It's about how we use it. Yeah.
How does one get into wildlife filmmaking, especially early on in their career?
I think now the times are changing. There are many more avenues for filmmakers to kind of get into this kind of filmmaking. But the baseline is that you have to be really passionate. I don't think it was easy earlier. I don't think it's easy now also. The only common factor in this is persistence, passion about the field, and to be able to really stick, to be really, if you're really passionate about it, you have to stick it out. Whether it's working in a studio with a filmmaker, or whether it's working on your own films with whatever camera you have, watching a lot of films. It's about, I think that's the only way I can answer it. There's no set way to become a wildlife filmmaker, you know? But yes, some of the paths which wildlife filmmakers have taken is like for us, like for example, I joined Riverbanks, learned on the job and moved on. Many people follow that path. Many of them also get into wildlife research. They do wildlife courses like marine biology or any other wildlife course, and then get into filmmaking. That also helps a lot because the more knowledge you have of the facts of what's happening on the ground, it always informs the filmmaking you do. And now there are many more options. For example, you have Round Glass Sustain, which really promotes emerging filmmakers. You know, you have the Habitats Trust, which is also opening channels. Then you have Longer Bay India, which is an environment newsletter. They also have a video part to it. And if you have put in a few years of work and have built enough data, then you also have the National Geographic grants. A lot of things have opened up now. So, but I think the common factor remains persistence and passion for the subject because it's not an easy field.
So, what motivated you to start Dusty Food Production and Dusty Foundation? And what is your vision at these organizations?
Actually, more than the production houses, that was a very linear part to what I was doing. I was at Riverbanks. I wanted to set up my own studio. So that's how Dusty Food Production started. But more and more, my work moved a lot towards conservation education. And from the time I'd spent in the field, there were two things which I felt were the two questions which were in my mind was exactly what you asked me. How do young people get into conservation filmmaking? And the other thing is, how do you bring out these incredible stories which are happening on the ground? How do you merge these two? So I came up with this project called the Green Hub Project, which is a fellowship for youth, especially from remote areas, from marginalized communities, from tribal communities. An opportunity of a video fellowship where they spend 1 year with us and they learn the art of video storytelling, but especially linked to conservation. And the whole idea was that it would be a platform where anybody without even access to opportunities, Greener would be that platform where young people could join and and learn, build their networks, and tell their own stories of their own communities, of their own land, of their own forest and own rivers. So this is what I've kind of developed over the last 10 years now. We started in 2015 and now we have Green Hub in the Northeast, Green Hub in Central India, and Green Hub Himalayas, Western Himalayas just started. So that's my main focus of work. And the main motivation which you asked me was to engage more and more youth and empower them in conservation action and social change, and really using video as a tool of transformation. So that's what I do here.
So, three of your films have received prestigious awards. One of them was the Shores of Silence, which we spoke about earlier. The other two are the Wild Meat Trail and the Last Migration. Could you just talk about these two films very briefly?
Yeah, while I was in Rookbanks, we got two of these Panda Awards. One was the Last Migration was the first time. That's the time when elephants had started coming into Madhya Pradesh, that Sarguja district. Sarguja used to be part of Madhya Pradesh at that time. And the first time the elephants had started moving in those areas, and almost there was a herd of 18 elephants, but many human deaths had happened. So there was this plan where Kunki elephants from the south came, and the whole herd was captured to be put back into forest service after training. So the last migration dealt with this entire capture of the wild elephants, and through that process of capturing the elephants are kind of the film showcase what are the things happening with the environment. Right? That was way back in 1994, I think it got the award. Shows of Silence, as I shared with you, was on Great Sharks. Wild Meat Trail was once I set up my own company, Dusty Food Productions. We started filming a Himalayan black bear project, which Wildlife Trust of India was doing in Pake Tiger Reserve in Arunachal. And as we were doing that film, we started hearing about the wild meat markets, where wildlife is sold after it's hunted. And this led us to we filmed the Himalayan black bear project for almost 5 years to 6 years. And in that process, we also started following the trail of wild meat being sold in various markets. So the wild meat trail really looked at what is the impact of wildlife hunting just for meat, and what are the implications for wildlife. So again, it was a very layered film which looked at traditional systems, it looked at wildlife, it looked like what the future holds. So yeah, that's the film which won the Panda Award in 2010. Yeah. And I think the important part of Wild Meat Trail was that was the film which you can say, was a stepping stone for us to start working with the communities in the Northeast. An extension of that film was Under the Canopy, which is a conservation education program, which helped us to start working with communities directly in partnership with an NGO called Northeast Network. And with the same NGO, we started the Green Hub project in 2015. Yeah.
So, where can one watch these films?
I think The Last Migration and Shows of Silence must be on Riverbank Studios website. It must be there. And the Wild Meat Trail is on the Dusty Foot India website. So I think all the films are online, if I'm not mistaken.
And what are some films which you are currently working on, if you're working on any films right now?
My main work is with Greener Project now, which is really because that's a very extensive program now, because we have 20 fellows every year who join us across 3 centers. So they are the ones who are making the films now. And I think every year, more than 20, 25 films come out from every center. So these can all be seen on the Greener Video Diary. These films are all for open access. So a lot of these films are online on the YouTube channel. And under Dusty Foot Productions, which is now led by another team which worked with me for many years, they're working on various films there's a film series we are doing with turtles. They're doing some films in the forests of Arunachal. And recently, there was a project with the Habitats Trust where the Rehab alumni did a series of 50 short films. It's called Stories from the Ground. It's on, again, the Habitat Trust YouTube channel. You can see these films on that.
So in 2019, you got inducted as an Ashoka Fellow. So what was this about and how was it impacted your work at Green Hub?
Ashoka Fellowship is actually one of the oldest fellowships for people who are working in social enterprises. And I think I was inducted because of the Greener Project. And what the Ashoka Fellowship does is it really expands the network of people across the globe because you have Ashoka Fellows across the world. And it also leads to a lot of collaborations between different Ashoka Fellows. So that's the biggest advantage. So there's in my batch, there's another fellow called Abhinav who works with folk music. It's a recording label for folk musicians. And his foundation is called the Anand Foundation. So we met during the Ashoka Fellowship induction, and we're trying to collaborate in the Northeast with musicians. And yeah, so that's the way it helps you actually. It's a very strong network of change makers. And anywhere you go, you can meet up with them. You can invite them as resource people for your own project. So yeah.
Talk about the Forest Project initiative of Green Hub.
Actually, it's called the Youth for Forest. Youth for Forest, which is related to ecological restoration. So when we talk about the future and you talk about solutions, and I think there are two things. One is really saving what we already have. Any patch of virgin forest or any patch of dense forest areas or any kind of wild habitats, I think it's important for us to just protect it. So that's the first thing. And second thing is how do you really scale up ecological restoration projects? So now we have a network of greener fellows across the region. And it started with many of the alumni. It's not necessarily that they'll become filmmakers because video is a tool which we're using, but many of them go directly into community and conservation projects. So one of our Green Hub alumni from the first batch, went back and started working with his community to revive some of the June lands and get the forests back. And now we have some other fellows also. We have 3 learning sites for ecological restoration. And this entire thing where we are involving youth in restoration work is called Youth for Forest. And we are also part of the larger Ecological Restoration Alliance, which is an all India alliance of really deep restoration practitioners. So the idea is to learn from them. An idea is that through ERA, if we can get the right guidance for young people to bring the forest back, that's the main focus of youth programs.
And how can individuals contribute or join Green Hub?
So Green Hub is quite an open space. Like we are based in Tezpur, Assam. That's the pilot project. And the people can intern with us. The internships are open through the year. Whenever there's a job opening, we anyway put it out online. But the interesting part of Green Hub is that we've also started these labs, collaborative labs for the living labs. So Living Labs has, apart from Green Hub and Youth for Forest, which I've already talked to you about, we have another 4 labs which are led by different visionaries. So there's the Canopy Collective, which is led by a wildlife researcher called Nandini Velo. The Wellness Lab led by Ravi Raj and Aditi, who are trying to develop a group of youth mental health practitioners in the Northeast. There's the Story Lab, which is led by they have developed a digital archive of stories around the river. Yeah, like so if anybody wants to join any of the labs, they can also join any of the they can come to Green Hub, they can go to the Canopy Collective website and join as a member. They can contact any of us if they're interested in any of the labs under Living Labs.
And what have been some of the biggest challenges you have faced throughout your conservation career so far?
As a filmmaker, I think your biggest thing is you want to do stories and you're constantly looking for funds. So when we started, the avenues for funding were very limited, but I would say that it's not really a challenge, it's part of the process. For So same thing with when we started Green Hub, the challenge was, will anybody support our idea? Because it was absolutely a new idea. There was nothing like this which existed. So the biggest challenge was whether people will believe in your idea, whether people will fund the idea, support the idea. So that was the biggest challenge. But once it took off and the work progressed and people saw value in it, over the years it's become like a lot of people are supporting it. But I think the main thing is that as the project grows, you have to be constantly on your feet thinking of how to make sure that whatever you're doing, the impact is really on the ground. Are you really making a difference on the ground? Is the forest coming back? Is the river getting revived? Are you really creating sustainable livelihoods? So I think the biggest thing as your project grows is the fact that you have to be constantly on your feet thinking and finding solutions, finding connections, and not really sitting back. There's no, I don't think in this field you can ever sit back and say you've done things. You have to, the work just carries on, and it's work that needs a skill, like this time. It's not the thing you can sit back and never say ki your work is good. So I think it's not really a challenge. It's if it just work, then yeah, that's it.
And my final question for you is that what has been some of your most memorable moments from your conservation career?
I think it's a lot of time. I think there are many memorable moments, but I think the time you spend in the field, especially if you're making wildlife films, the kind of things you get to see, whether it's the turtles, whether it's the honey hunters, whether it's even when you're going to a village and interviewing people, I think those moments remain frozen in time. Like, you're sitting on the beach and, or you're just sitting in a beautiful landscape surrounded by the forest with no sound, with no electricity. I think there are innumerable moments in the wild, and that's why once you get into it, it's a very difficult line to leave ever because you see so much value in it. And this is something which I think nothing can buy. Like, sometimes I really feel like you feel fortunate when you're not really living in a very. I've lived in Delhi for many years, but you really feel fortunate that you have so much time spent in the wild or so much time spent to next to rivers or forests or animals, being able to just watch an animal for such a long time. Nothing can buy that or nothing can replace that, I would say, you know? So, yeah. So, when you look back, you're just happy that you chose this line of work and you keep with all the challenges, with everything disappearing, with so many natural landscapes disappearing, with constructions happening, with water shortage, with so many things happening, you still feel somewhere uh, you're working in the right direction. Even the failures are there, you're ready for the failures, but it's the right way to move forward. Yeah.
So that's the final question I had for you this interview. Thank you so much for taking time out for this.
Oh, thank you. Thank you, Anush. Thank you for the conversation.
If you made it till the end of this podcast, feel free to leave your thoughts on the topic and do not forget to share and subscribe. Before we end the podcast, I would like to share another list of conservation books which I highly recommend. This time it is on the topic of rewilding and ecological restoration. The first is a seminal book called Rewilding: The Radical New Science of Ecological Recovery by Glenn Blight and Paul Chipson, which covers the restoration of ecological processes and ecosystem functioning by the reintroduction of species, especially megaherbivores. A less technical and science heavy book is Rewilding Africa: The Restoration of Wilderness on a War Ravaged Continent which explores conservation across various heavily militarized landscapes. And the final book is Wilder: How Rewilding is Transforming Conservation and Changing the World. This covers the rewilding of various charismatic species ranging from pumas in the US to the Arabian oryx in the Middle East and giant tortoise. And with that, I would like to end this episode of the Think Wildlife podcast. See you next Monday